is my great pleasure to introduce the moderator for our Stories for Children session. We have with us Meenakshi F Paul ma'am. She is a principal and professor of English at Himachal Pradesh University. She's edited and authored several books. Some of her poems from her book, Kindling from the Terrace Field, have been used for gender sensitization in India and abroad. She has also translated short stories by Himachali writers and acclaimed authors such as Krishna Sopti, Premchand, and Joginder Paul. I welcome you, ma'am, for this session and request you to take over this e-stage.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sakshi. It's a delight for me to be here today. And thank you, Manjujetka ma'am, Shulini University, all the people involved with the Literature Festival for giving me this opportunity to be here today. I am very privileged to have on the panel three extraordinary writers who, let me be honest, I didn't know about. But since Shulini University, got in touch, I got in touch with them, and my life has been more enriched and better ever since I got in touch with them. In fact, I'm recovering from a very bad bout of viral, and it is their stories which have helped me pass the dreadful days. So it is my pleasure, absolute pleasure, to introduce the authors for this session. Prashant Pinge, who is based in Mumbai, and Prashant is an engineer and businessman by profession. He has also had has been to the best educational institutions across the world, including Purdue University and the University of New South Wales, and has so many diverse interests that it's really difficult to put Prashant within a frame, right from collecting coins to studying mythology to ancient history to script writing to animation. He's also moved from writing fiction to writing and producing films, which is so interesting, and we hope to hear more about it in the course of the next few minutes. Prashant is also a prolific writer. He's got so many books, and I would encourage everybody to visit his page, which is really intriguing, the amount of books that he has written. And Prashant has does feature regularly in reading clubs and festivals, and I found him on so many reading apps as well. So it looks like that Prashant is really striding the digital and the paper worlds, both in his stories. We also have with us Prasun Roy. Prasun is from Kolkata, and interestingly, he's also a businessman by profession. And he writes stories of adventure, mystery, thrill for young adults. And his first two books, Ringo and the Yogi and The Good Wizard, which just came out, have been on the bestsellers list ever since they were published. Interestingly, Prasun is also a tennis enthusiast and is trained in Western classical piano. We would like to know how these hobbies of Prasun help him when he writes his fiction. Also with us, Maulshree Mahajan. Maulshree really livens up the screen whenever she's there. She grew up writing poems in our own state, in Dharamshala. And by age 15, Maulshree was already being featured in the Tribune. Her poems and her short stories were published regularly there. And then Maulshree went to Tokyo to train there and is a hospitality and spoken English trainer. She says that she loves to travel and dream. And I think that is a requirement for a writer to dream. And she spins stories through her observations as she travels. Her two novels in the Singh Sisters Adventure series, The Mystery of the Missing Buddha and The Mystery of the Forbidden Fort, have been extremely popular, creating anticipation for more from her pen. And we are hoping to read some more very soon. So welcome, Prashant, Prasun, and Maulshree. I'm really looking forward to conversing with you. Let's begin with a general question. And Prashant, I'll begin with you. I was very intrigued. I read on your page that you had a dream way back in 2003 that compelled you to begin writing. Would you like to tell us more about it? This seems very interesting.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thanks, Meenakshi, for the wonderful intro, and a big hello to Prasun and Maulshree. Great to be here with you guys. So yes, I actually started writing in 2003 because of this dream. Prior to that, I guess the last time I really wrote was probably the essays in grade 10. So after that, I really didn't ever consider writing until this dream, and I dreamt of this plot, and I really just had to get out of bed and put it down on a piece of paper. And that's when it really hit me that perhaps I should explore uh, writing, and that's how it started actually. But I haven't written that book yet. I think it's still some time away. It's been a lot of years, but I started slowly with writing about my experiences, and then graduating to magical topics, and then slowly finding my own voice and writing style. So that's how it's been so far.
Interesting that you say you still haven't written that book. So do you still wake up in the middle of the night?
No, not anymore.
Okay. Yeah. So Prashun, you tell us, how did you begin to write?
Yes, ma'am. So can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So like Prashant said, like writing was also not something which I had in mind from the beginning, I would say. But yeah, in school or in college, I used to write short stories and all. And interestingly, in 2013, my first child was about to be born. And during that time, the Uttarakhand floods happened. And, I had an idea that if I write something, it would have an element of imagination or something which will be interesting for all ages. So that time I tried writing a story about a boy using the backdrop of the Uttarakhand floods, where they go for a camp and they get stuck over there, and how supposedly 100-year-old yogi becomes his friend, and together how they achieve an unachievable task. So that was my first take on writing something full length. And then the publishing process happened. I didn't know anything about how it goes on, but yes, it went on, and the first book got published, and that's how the journey began with my book Ringo and the Yogi.
Great. That's very interesting. Your first child was on his way or her way, and that's how you began writing stories.
And the other day, I was telling Maulshree also in another session that I wrote about a boy whose characters were like he used to love eating aloo paratha, or he used to play with certain toys that I had imagined that time. But now my first child is my son, and he is about 7 years old now. And when I see him, he has all those same habits. It's kind of uncanny, but he does have those habits. So it's really interesting.
This is interesting. This is so interesting. What's your son called?
His name is Ekalavya.
Ekalavya. Okay. And somehow Ekalavya has imbibed Ringo's characteristics.
Yes.
It looks like. That's wonderful. So Maulshree, we know you started writing in your pre-teens, so you would have been still in school. So
Yes.
what inspired you to write and publish at that very young age?
Okay. Firstly, thank you so much for your kind introduction earlier. And like you said, I started writing at a very young age, primarily because I grew up around creativity. My Nanaji used to write in Urdu. He wrote poetry and short stories in Urdu. My mom, she writes in Hindi. She was named one of Himachal's 10 poets to look out for in her college time. So I grew up in the middle of all this creativity where, reading and writing were just a natural part of life. So when I felt the need to express myself, I think it was very instinctive that I chose writing. So I started writing as a preteen, and I was encouraged by everybody at home and at school to submit these poems and short stories to the school magazine and later on to the Tribune. And the first poem that I sent to the Tribune was on Sachin Tendulkar. I was barely 15 at that time, and it was published in the children's section. So that was a huge boost to my confidence that, okay, it was a big deal, and it still is, because that was the first thing that I sent and it was published. The writing process itself is so joyful for me. It is an adulterated joy, so to speak. And I find a sense of peace and satisfaction when I'm writing. So I've continued to do so. And every time it's the same, that calmness that I feel in myself, the need to get out a story and then be able to see it on paper. That keeps me going. And it has been the same for so many decades now.
That's wonderful. You said that it really calms you down when you read, when you write. But isn't it always also sometimes a struggle? Maybe you struggle to find the right words or perhaps a metaphor.
Yes.
And how do you deal with that?
I struggle, and sometimes I also overwork myself. I not just a struggle, but working myself in terms of writing the exact word that I want to express myself in. That is also sometimes a struggle. Or sometimes there's a line that sounds very nice in my head, but when I write it down and it is not so impressive, so then I feel slightly disappointed. Then how I leave it. I mean, my primary way of dealing with all these things is that I leave the line, the paragraph, or the page then and there, and I revisit it after a while. So if my thoughts are settled by then, I get a better option of writing that particular phrase or a metaphor or that particular word that I was looking for. If not, then I kind of settle for it. I try and sometimes search, on the net if I am, but I'm not very partial towards that process, looking for words on the net and then picking the exact word, because it is my sentiment, it is my emotion, it is my expression. I would rather have it that it occurs naturally to me. So I kind of give it a little time and then revisit it. That's how I tackle it.
Okay. And Prashant, do you also have these moments?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are very rare instances where you are in the flow and everything just moves according to the way you imagine. And I think one of the reasons for that is that the mind thinks much faster than the speed at which you can actually write. So then you get distracted from time to time, and I'm always besieged by new ideas that come in. So I've got 30 ideas waiting, and I'm in the middle of this book, and then I'm thinking about what about that idea. And so I've just stopped writing ideas or thinking about any more ideas because it really hampers the writing process in some ways. But I agree with Maulshree. I mean, if I am stuck, I tend to just kind of leave it aside for some time, go and do something else, take my mind off it. Because if I keep obsessing on it, then it really becomes a struggle, and that's not what we want. We want to enjoy the writing process. So just go for a walk, or just kind of just watch something, or just play with my son, or something different that completely takes my mind off the writing.
Okay. Yeah, that's good because if you obsess, then you just tie yourself in knots, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, Prashant, what do you have to say about that?
I usually write at a time when there's a lot of commotion around me. So either my children are running around, or there's a lot of things happening around in office because I need to keep on traveling for my work. So that's something like I don't find a lot of peaceful time when I can write, but I try to do it within the schedule or the routine. But yeah, suppose I have an idea and I feel kind of an unrest until I have written it down. So that's something which I experience. So if I'm finding a plot for a story to tell or a chapter, I don't get that satisfaction until it is written down, at least a draft of it. So that's how it has been for me.
Okay, so do you use pen and paper, or do you key in your story? I mean, what works for
I
you?
usually key in my stories. So I write
Okay,
it down on a Word document and keep on adding to it the contents.
okay, that's great. Um, I wanted to ask all of you, how difficult was it, to to become writers? Because you all are professionals also. You're running businesses, you're a trainer, you have families. So where did you get time to write? So Prashant has already partially answered it by saying in the middle of everything, he just puts it down. Um, I guess running your own business gives you that kind of freedom to write. But would you like to tell us some more about this? When you have other pressing engagements, or how do you, and you feel this urgent, urge to write something, then what do you do?
So usually what I do is, suppose we have some meetings going on every month for the first week. That usually happens for the model that we work on. So those days are really busy. And after coming back from work, my kids, they need my time. So it's like till 9 or 9:30, I either need to sit with them or play with them, read a book to them or something. Then what I usually do is like write during the night. So
Hmm.
I try to find some time after they go to sleep, and I take out 2 hours and write, and then I go to sleep. And like you were telling, like tennis is a hobby of mine. So morning I wake up pretty early, around 6 o'clock. So then when I go to play, an hour of exercise kind of opens up the mind. So then I can again repeat that routine. So that has been working fairly well for me when there is work pressure and I need to balance family, work, and writing. So that's how.
Great. That really sounds sorted out to me, Prashant. What about Prashant? How do you balance it?
Uh, well, I don't have a set routine for writing. I just write when I feel like it. Ideally, I try to get in a certain number of words in though on a daily basis. Because unless I feel it, I can't really just sit and write. Uh, Earlier, I think it was a little easier because my work was quite different from my creative writing. But now I'm also a part of a content startup, so I'm doing a lot of writing there as well. And it becomes kind of difficult to juggle because there I'm writing for toddlers and preschoolers, and currently I'm working on a romantic comedy, so the style of writing differs vastly, and to switch gears is a little bit of a problem. But yeah, I think for me the most important thing would be to have a certain number of words keyed in on a daily basis, because then that gives me the satisfaction that I've at least done something and taken my book a little bit closer to its conclusion.
Okay, that's good. What about Maulshree?
Okay, so for my first book, it's actually a very interesting thing, something that I feel is interesting. I was between jobs when I wrote my first book. And it was just to, have that, because I had enough time on my hands and I was feeling a bit restless. So I started to write a short story. When I started writing, it became longer than a short story and started turning into something that had chapters. wrote about 3-4 chapters of the first book, and I sent it to my sister that see how's it, and it was turning out to be an adventure, a mystery adventure. And she said, "This is very interesting. I want to see how what happens. You finish writing it quickly." So the first book that I wrote, it was just to pass time. To be very, very honest, I had some spare time. I started writing it, and I wrote it for myself, my family, my friends, and I thought I'll just give it to everybody to read and it'll be a good thing to do. But it turned out that everybody loved it. They wanted me to convert it into a book, and that's how the first book was written. When the first book came out, and it did, by God's grace, well, everybody started asking when the next in the series was coming out, although it was not intended to be a series. And then I suddenly had this pressure that, okay, they all have liked the first book and they want me. Of course, it's a wonderful idea that when the audience says or the readers say that we want to read the next one in the series, you already have an idea handed to you. And then I was like, okay, this is a lot of pressure. So interestingly, for the second book, I was stressed out the whole time. I wrote it, then I revised it, and then I rewrote it. So that was tedious, and I was worrying the whole time, and that took almost a year to finish. That was a stressful period because, like Prashant said, I'm not a very disciplined writer. I had once heard Ruskin Bond say that Ruskin Bond, that he tries to write 1,000 words per day. So I try that. I fail miserably at that. Sometimes I can barely write 100 words a day, and there are days that when I write 3,000 words as well. So the second book was completely written in a disarray where I was not disciplined, but I am trying to find something that fits between both, wherein my instinctive writing plus a little bit of discipline, so that I can have a better shot on being a regular author rather than somebody who writes out of whim and then two books come years apart. So I think it's better to have some sort of discipline, which I hope to achieve in the coming years.
Great, we hope so too. And I'm sure you will be consistent. We're really looking forward to more of your writing. So, like you said, it took you almost a year to write the second book.
Yes.
And when I was reading about Tara and Mira, I was also reminded of the Nancy Drew storybooks that we used to write and not write, read. So I wanted to know from you very interesting titles that you have, The Lost Buddha and The Forbidden Fort. So did you have to do a lot of research for writing these books?
For the research, yes, I have done a lot of research, but the places that I have chosen, for example, Dharamshala is the first story setting is Dharamshala, which is my hometown, like you already told the viewers. And the places that I've described in Dharamshala, all are real places, except for a couple of places where some action takes place, and I've created those areas. Now, when we talk about research, there are things that we just remember. There are things in your memories, the streets that you walked a million times. But then when you're writing it down and you want to be very precise about what you're writing, you have to do research. So although Dharamshala is a place that I know like the back of my hand, I did a lot of research in terms of what is the distance between McLeodganj and so and so market, and then this church or that church, because I didn't want to get that incorrect. That information is key, and then I didn't want to get that incorrect because a 15-year-old Maulshree was walking those roads at a pace that probably a 30-year-old won't be able to walk. So I believe that it is important to get your facts right. So I did a lot of research in terms of the distance, in terms of the food. When we talk about food, what do we have in Himachal Pradesh? There's obviously a staple in every state, even every district. So we have Kangri, we have a lot of influence of Kangri cuisine, like Solan closer to Shimla, so it has a slightly different cuisine than what we've had in Kangra and Dharamshala. So that requires a little bit of research. For the second book, again, I did a lot of research, The Mystery of the Forbidden Fort. Now, this is, the story is based in Jaipur and Samod. I've done my college from Hotel Management Institute in Jaipur. So again, the same thing, that Jaipur is like second home to me, and I know Jaipur in and out. But then again, when I was writing it down, I didn't want to get my facts incorrect. So a lot of research in terms of the food, the phrases that I used. For example, khamma ghani. Khamma ghani is how they greet you in Rajasthan. Now, when I was staying in Rajasthan, what I had observed is that when you say khamma ghani, some of the people will respond with a khamma ghani, or some would just say khani ghamma. So which one is correct? Which one should I use in my book? Which fits the context? That is the research that I had to do. Even with the places that I've mentioned, be it Amer Fort, how long it takes for the elephants to reach from the base of the fort to the top of the fort, that is also a research that was required. And I've done that a lot, just to know that I'm doing the right thing in terms of the facts and figures. Meenakshi ma'am. I think Meenakshi ma'am's connection is interrupted.
Yes, ma'am. I think there is some technical glitch on her end.
Okay.
But we can continue with the discussion.
Yes, we can continue.
Yeah, please continue.
So in terms of research, like I explained in detail, this is what I do. Even if I know the place in and out, I do a lot of research in terms of the distances, the cuisines, and the phrases that I used. So if, Prashant and Prasun could also give their inputs on what sort of research do you do?
Sure.
Prashant, you could go first, yeah.
Right. So in my case, yes, I think definitely research is something that's very important, but I think it depends on the kind of story you're writing. So the last children's book I published, which was Raja Balushahi and Rani Rasmalai in Mithaspur and other stories. Now, this is completely from my imagination. So all the character, at least that of the protagonist, is based on my son. But other than that, everything was make-believe. So I think that came through the imagination. And when I write from my imagination, I don't like to read or I don't like to do any research because I feel it somewhere gets influenced. But one of the earlier books I wrote, one of the first books, which was Raja and the Giant Donut. Now, this was about a dog, rather a group of dogs that travel from Shivaji Park in Mumbai to Sambhaji Park in Pune. Now, I grew up at Shivaji Park, so I really knew the area in and out. And so this was something really interesting for me to tackle because, we spent so many evenings there taking a walk around the park, and it just made me wonder, what do all these stray dogs here do? I mean, they're always there. People like us come and go, but these dogs are always there. So that's how the idea started. But then a lot of research had to be done, and it was really, I guess, a great coincidence that there is a Shivaji Park in Mumbai and there's a Sambhaji Park in Pune. So that's how the story started building up, and then they had to travel from Mumbai, or rather Shivaji Park, which they thought was perhaps a city in itself, and they didn't realize that Pune was another city. So then how do these dogs tackle that journey from going to the bus station at Dadar and finally catching a train? And then I had to, like Maulshree said, figure out the distances. And then there's a stopover at Lonavala and or some other place I can't remember right now. But there's that famous vada pav or something that they have there. So those kind of little minute details I needed to figure out. Now, as she said, I had traveled to Pune so many times, and in fact, I'm based out of Pune now. But then we have to really do research in terms of what are the proper stops and and then you obviously need to insert some of your own material. And nowadays, because of the internet, you have things like Google Maps and a lot of these other tools that are available that have made research really, really easy. But yes, I mean, I would definitely say that research is something that becomes very important, especially when you write historical fiction. Prashant, any thoughts?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I completely agree with you, Prashant and Maulshree. Like I'll give you my experience. Like when I was writing my first book, The Ringo and the Yogi, it was like about an expedition to Joshimath, where the kids go from a school of Kolkata and they reach Joshimath. So there's a train journey and then there is a bus journey ahead of it. So the whole thing need to be researched because what kind of landscape is there when they go from the foothills to the top at Joshimath. So like the landscape changes, the climate changes happen, the kilometers that they cover until some the trees also starts changing. So those things, yes, I needed a lot of research, and then there was trekking in that story. So how trekking is done, how the scouts and guides people, they handle these kind of activities. So those things, yes, I had to do some research because kids today are very intelligent. So the IQ and EQ has gone up with every generation, I believe. So you cannot write something which won't be credible. So you have to be very sure about what you are writing, because they will do their research. So they will Google it up and see that, okay, Joshimath is how many kilometers from the city of Kolkata. So yes, that was needed. But then again, when I was writing the second one, The Good Wizard, it's more about magic and wizardry during the time of the Mughal era. So there, a few things had to be definitely researched, like the attires that people used to wear during the time of Shah Jahan and the society and everything. But rest, yeah, I thought I will depend on my imagination, because the readers have never seen that era, or they haven't seen or known what the wizards of that time were like. So my imagination will then be credible for them to believe. So yes, research is important. I definitely.
And that reminds me, Prasun, since you mentioned the trees in my second book, The Mystery of the Forbidden Fort, I mentioned Samor, and there is a tree, Kachnar tree, that I mention over and over.
Yes.
So now I wrote the Kachnar tree, and I mentioned that it had more purplish flowers, because I remembered that I've seen these trees in Rajasthan, but then I started second guessing myself as soon as I wrote it, whether I had seen those trees in Rajasthan or elsewhere. So I did the whole research. I made myself crazy, and I researched whether there are Kachnar trees in Rajasthan, specifically in the Samod area. Are there purple blooms of Kachnar in that area? And then finally, the season that I was mentioning, which was winter. So are these trees blooming during that season? Because it's a very simple thing. A child who's living in Rajasthan, in that area, reads the book and says, what is this? Ye ped to hai nahi. So I don't want to be caught in that sort of a thing. And it's a very simple thing. Better to check it, cross check it, and check it the third time instead of getting it wrong. So even with that tree, I remember I made myself crazy for 2-3 days by reading about it over and over, that I should get it right, the season, the blooms, the flowers, whether it is something that is feasible or not for the story and otherwise. So I have done that as well. So it is important, and these are very small elements when you're reading and you feel that's such a small element, but it really isn't for the writer because they're researching so much about it.
Exactly. And like Prashant was saying, like if you're writing something which is in the historical context, then the research becomes even more important.
Yes.
I was trying out something which is in a different genre about a revolutionary leader of our country. So there I had to do a lot of secondary research from the primary materials that are available in libraries or in archives, and then you have to churn it out and put it into an imaginative context. Correct. So that is also very, very significant. So Prashant, I have a question to you. I was looking at your page. So there's this Ria Rabbit app that is you had mentioned over there. So can you tell us something about?
Right, right. So Ria Rabbit is just actually an intellectual property that we've created. It's about this rabbit, Ria, and a family that lives in this place called Pashunagri in India, which is somewhere between, I would say, Mumbai and Pune. And we've just created a lot of content. So there are videos, there are audio stories, and there are 18 picture books that have so far been released. So it's like an entire universe of characters and content for 0 to 8-year-olds. So that and all that content we've kind of brought together into this app.
And there must be some characters who are present all throughout in these, like a rabbit or something which is going on, like a continuous story.
Right. I mean, it's about Ria and her family, basically.
Okay.
And then there are a lot of other characters. I mean, so we brought in all the animals, and it's like a multicultural, multi-religious theme, and animals from different states of India. So it's just kind of something that we want to create specifically for an Indian audience. So you have a lot of, and I think you would have experienced this when it comes to writing as well, that a lot of content is imported, even though we have a really good number of Indian or local talent. Even then, right now, a lot of content, most of the content, or most of the books are still imported from the West. And this is our, I guess, humble attempt to try and at least change that. So, instead of talking about Halloween all the time or Western festivals, we want to bring in a Raksha Bandhan or a Diwali, these kind of things. And the most important thing for us was creating child-safe content. So we are very careful to make sure that there is no violence at all. And, if somebody is riding a cycle, then they're wearing the helmets and the knee pads and everything. So we're very careful about those kind of things.
Yeah, and you're right, because, there are so many novels or books which are not from the Indian background, like they're so popular in a country. For example, Harry Potter.
Right.
So, like, we don't have a Harry Potter which has been written in India, but there is not scarcity of talent in our country. So a character like Harry Potter, if it can be created by somebody from the country, that would be more relatable to the kids who are reading it also. Because
I have some input on this, actually, the Harry Potter thing that you just mentioned. And I was having a conversation with the publisher, I guess a couple of years ago. And I was categorically told that young adult fantasy fiction is not something that Indian publishers are really interested in. So you would have seen that there's hardly any young adult fantasy stories that are coming up. Because otherwise I feel that India has a lot of potential for something like this. Now you have historical fiction, basically, but that's kind of, either based in our history or mythology. But you don't have content that is from someone, like a high fantasy, which is completely set in a completely imaginative world.
Like Haruna and the Sea of Stories by Salman Rushdie. It's like complete fantasy. So
Right. But you don't see, I haven't seen any local author whose fantasy books have really, caught the fancy of the nation, basically.
Exactly.
Hi Meenakshi, good to have you back.
Good to have you back.
Good to have you back.
Well, I had a power outage briefly. Yeah. So why don't you continue? And it's so nice to hear you. I've lost the thread. So what I could figure out, of course, was that you're talking about fantasy stories for children. And how strange, because in India, we have so many ghost stories, stories of gods and goddesses, of yakshas, of, supernatural beings. We also have so many in the folk tradition, where Tota, the parrot in the cage, or the Rakshas. And our traditions have been dealing with fantasy. And especially, of course, they could have been didactic and dealing with good and evil. However, there was no dearth of fantasy that we had in our olden stories, and how a woman can become a tree and turn herself back to a woman, and snakes and changing shapes, changing. So many, I don't know why the publishers should feel that there isn't enough for scope for fantasy. I really don't know which segment of readers they are looking at. Because sometimes when a certain something begins to sell, then publishers are hesitant to really stick their necks out and experiment with something else. What do you have to say about that?
From my experience, actually, you're absolutely right. So, Harry Potter, for instance, or Artemis Fowl, there are these big names that have already achieved a lot of success in the West. So, it's very easy for publishers to simply import these books and sell them to the Indian audience rather than experimenting with the local talent. You really don't know whether something like this, like an Indian fantasy, would really hit it off. So unfortunately, you see the same stories, which are mired in Panchatantra, the Aesop's fables, or the same content being regurgitated uh, even today, basically.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
rather than encouraging Indian writers to come up with something different, you can perhaps have the same kind of paradigm, but different stories, and something that an Indian audience could really connect to. That's, I think, that's really missing.
Yeah. And so, Prashant, what about you? Because we used to read so many Bengal magic stories.
Yes.
We used to hear about them. So how is it there? How is it in your area?
Uh, See, the folk tales from Bengal, they have a lot of potential if it can be presented in a proper manner to uh, the readers, I would say, or the younger generations, because there are ghost stories, there are stories of that Thakumar Jhulik that we used to have during our times. So those are definitely, I would say, golden resources that we have, and things similar to that should be created or at least tried, because genre is something which is from the point of view of marketing, I would say. So a publisher's point of view of whom to market a book has created this term called genre, I believe. Because if I'm saying it's a book for young adults, that doesn't mean a parent cannot read it. So there are adults who would also like to read a story if it is interesting. So even older people do read Harry Potter, not just children. So
Yeah.
that is a reason why I believe that you should keep writing in what you believe in. So like when I was writing my second book, the Good Wizard, so I had in mind that I would write something about magic, wizardry, which would enhance the fantasy of the readers, be it young or an adult. So that is why I chose the subject. And I think that choice of subject becomes very important for an author, because if you like the subject yourself, what you create would definitely be liked. So yes, that is very important.
Good. We have a comment from Ashu Khosla. There was a discussion on mythology yesterday, and I had asked whether we need to change the way we tell mythology to children, given the changes in society. So, Sita's Agni Pariksha, for example, how do we explain it to our children today? So, Maulshree, would you like to take that?
Okay, so I think, yeah, I agree that a different approach needs to be taken to the ancient old tales that have been told, or the legends and stories that we've heard, keeping the core of the story intact. If we could find a way to have a way to conceptualize it in a way that it becomes relevant to the child of today. I think it would work. Yes. I know a lady in Chennai who does these storytelling sessions where she uses different tools to narrate her stories, and she has all these puppets and of Sita and Rama, and these stories are told in a very comical way, or maybe in a puppetry kind of a way, where she has this whole sheet, and like a how do I explain this? This is like creating a visual representation of Ramayana, so to speak,
Hmm.
with dolls and puppets
Hmm.
in a simpler language. The depth of the message is put in simpler terms, in simpler words for the child to understand. So if we could put across the depths of our mythology in simpler words for the child to relate to, then I guess it could work. Yes.
Yes. What do you have to say, Prashant?
I
Interpreting
think,
the Ramayana maybe for young children?
right. So, from what I know, I think there are a lot of versions of Ramayana out there, and the ones that are typically that we typically find on the bookshelves are probably the most popular ones. The other thing I would like to say is that I think these stories should probably be presented in the context in which they were meant to be heard, because they were written thousands of years ago, and at that time the society was a very different one. Right now things have changed, so I think the way to bring these stories forth to a young audience would be to invite their participation or their views. So you present it, that this is what happened, but what do you think? Do you think that this would work today? Do you think that this was the right thing to do? Basic. So at least create a dialogue when it comes to these kind of ideas, because they are certainly not simplistic things that can be, that you can have, that you can say, okay, this is right or this is wrong. They can't be dismissed either way.
Hmm.
So I think it's important to start that conversation with children, and then I think today's children are very, very intelligent, whether it's their EQ or IQ, and I think we can leave it to them to then take forward that conversation, basically.
Yes, there is a question from Manjujetka, Professor Manjujetka. In an earlier session, there was a discussion of the impact of horror and mystery on the juvenile mind. Your thoughts?
Okay, so
Okay, should I
I'd like to take that, because I wouldn't speak too much of horror, because that's slightly different from mystery. But if I were to talk of mystery, I think mystery is a genre that appeals to the young ones as well as adults alike. That is, mystery is also of different forms. Could it be a light mystery, something of a very psychological mystery sort of a thing? So when we say mystery, it's kind of a generic word. But then let's say we're talking about a lighter mystery. I think it is one of those genres that appeals to people of all ages. I remember as a child, I would always want to read not say thrillers, but mysteries where I would want to catch the killer or guess who the killer was. And if I feel that your brain is working as a child, the brain is working in terms of looking for the killer or solving the mystery, I think it is not something that we can look at as a negative impact.
Mhm.
The mind is working on overdrive only when it crosses the realms of reality. Trying to solve something shouldn't be considered a negative thing, but crossing the threshold into something negative, I suppose that has to be monitored, definitely. But we've all grown up reading novels of Enid Blyton. We've all read Hardy Boys and Nancy Drews. And very close to my heart is our very own Nilima Sinha, who has written this beautiful books about children in Bihar. And the book that I remember very clearly is The Jewels of Chandipur. So it's a light mystery set in India. It is a very powerful, positive book. That is also the genre of mystery. And it leaves you with a lot of, positivity, a lot of happiness. And I don't think it's negative impact. There is no negative impact of such a book unless and until it is something that leaves a psychological scar on somebody's the young one's mind. I suppose it is on the author to check the limits and then know that if I'm writing for young adults or for the young ones, we should not cross this limit. And that's what it is. Even with horror, with the R.L. Stein's Goosebumps that we used to read as young ones, we've all read it. So they were not very scary. But then again, you have that threshold that you can't cross. It's as simple as that. And the author needs to know the limits and stick to those. This is just my opinion, of course.
That's great, and I quite agree with you, Maulshree. Yes, because mystery does open the imagination of the readers, and it also sharpens their analytical skills and critical thinking. And we do see children enjoying mysteries, and finding the killer or finding the robber is something very exciting, not only for children, it's also exciting for us. But yes, like you said, we need to know where to draw the line, because we cannot have horror piling on horror for children, because their minds are impressionable. Yes. So Prashun's, for example, Ringo, and he found this yogi, 100-year-old yogi, that very beautifully balances the catastrophe that happened in Chamoli. And so you have those flash floods, you have so many people dead, and you have so many people in danger. But this fantastic figure of the yogi holds it together, and his friendship with the young boy, and then the story of courage, and the story of how they overcome all odds to manage to bring the rescuers to the rest of the people. And then the yogi disappears. So that yogi would also be a symbol then, a symbol of the resources of that child, the child himself. Yes. So I could even see the yogi as an externalization of his own strength. So was he imagining this yogi, 100-year-old yogi, or the yogi was there from the fantasy world? And of course, when we talk of the Himalayas, we do expect a more than 100-year-old yogi moving somewhere in the Himalayas. So yes, that's wonderful.
It was more of a bond of friendship, ma'am, I would say.
Yes.
That can enhance the courage which is there in a child's heart, but it needs to be brought out. So
yes,
the yogi was a tool, I would say, which helped that child to understand his inner strengths.
and be courageous. Yes.
Yes. And like you were talking about mysteries, I would like to mention over here about the works of Satyajit Ray. If you think about Feluda, he's a phenomenal detective, and I have grown up reading those stories, and that is a mystery. We have a lot of mystery in his stories, and it's clubbed with the view of a traveler. So wherever Feluda is traveling, the child reads the book and he can see that city in front of his eyes. So he doesn't need to Google it up. The way it has been described, the mystery and the joy of traveling or knowing a new place combines together to give a fulfilling experience. So that sort of mystery, a series needs to be written, and I really liked why Maulshree took up a series, and I would really tell her that you continue, and we would expect more of the Singh sisters. So
yeah. Yes, certainly. So tell us something more about, have you tried to write a travelogue? Any one of you, have you ever considered writing a travelogue for children?
Okay, so ma'am, the books that I have written, both the books have a lot of description of the places that I have mentioned. So if I say Dharamshala, you will find that I have not just talked, I mean, of course it is a mystery, but then the places in Dharamshala, be it Naddi, be it McLeodganj or Lower Dharamshala, so all these war memorial, the lesser known places such as war memorial, which the locals are actually more inclined to visit. So these places I have mentioned the food and the culture. Um, Same with the second book, The Mystery of the Forbidden Fort. So Rajasthan is so warm and so colorful. I mean, you can write really books and books on just the culture and the beauty of Rajasthan. So I have talked about Jaipur and a lot of sightseeing in Jaipur. Of course, the food. Then we travel to Samod, again a place that I have visited a couple of times. So I have tried to give a glimpse of all the places that the stories are set in, and the culture as well as the food, the very heartwarming aspects of any place that you visit, because I feel it is a privilege to pick up a city. You pick a city for two reasons: either it is very close to your heart, so you set your story there, or a place that you really are keen to visit, unless and until, of course, it's a fictitious place. It is a place that you want to visit. So these are the two reasons, primary reasons, that you're picking up a place. So why not take this privilege and use this privilege in a way that the readers also catch a glimpse of the real aspects of that city or that place. So try doing that, but of course, it's not a full-fledged travelogue. It is just a partial description as the story moves along.
Okay. There is a comment from Ashu Khoslaji. Feluda and Malgudi days are best of children's stories from great writers. And we would agree with that, definitely. So would you like to share who your favorite authors have been and who may have had some impact on you in your writing?
Sure. I think growing up, my favorite author was definitely Enid Blyton, without a doubt. When it comes to mysteries, I think Agatha Christie is someone who I really admire. But my all-time favorite author is P.G. Woodhouse, hands down. Yeah.
Great. And I can see that humor, that subtle humor in your writings. I was able to see that. It was very interesting. In fact, I was quite struck by your protagonist of so many books, Naughty Avantika. And I was struck because she shares your name with your wife. And
Yeah.
what made you give this protagonist your wife's name? It's so interesting.
These stories actually are based on her. So the first book, which was Avantika's Garden, is about when the family travels um, for a vacation, and those 7 days that they aren't there. So she had a dog called Sheru. So and then the other characters are fictitious. So that garden though is very real, and the exact same layout and everything was used for that. And then Naughty Avantika is about stories from her childhood, basically. Then there's fictitious, but the characters are again either real or amalgamated from various relatives, basically from a family.
How interesting. I would like to ask the same question of Maulshree and Prashant also. How do you pick out names, really? Do the names have a resonance? And how do you think those names are going to, appeal to the young readers? Do you spend time doing that, or do they suddenly come to your head, or what?
For me, it has been, sudden impulses. Like Ringo and the Yogi was the name which I thought at one go. And I kept that name. And when we submitted to my publisher, they eventually liked it at the first go itself. So that was for the first book. And the second one also, like The Good Wizard, was something which I suddenly thought of because it's about a student-teacher relationship. So that is what the book mainly teaches anyone who reads it. So how an unconditional love of bond develops between a student and a teacher, which is like immortal. So that name, that is why The Good Wizard. So that came to me just like that. And I wrote it over there. So like in my blog, like we were talking about travelogues. So I haven't written a travelogue, but I have a blog called The Floating Diary. So it's about a man who is experiencing amnesia kind of disease where he's forgetting everything. So he writes down his experiences on a diary, and the diary is pretty old. It happened during the tsunamis of 2003, and somebody found that diary. Nobody knows where that writer of the diary is, but when you read it, every story has a relation to some place or some object or some experience. So that is where it has some aspects of travelogues over there. And there also I experienced that those impulsive names kind of worked with me. So there was a story called Raw Mango, or there was a story called The Plantain Flower. And they got even translated to Telugu magazines. Like there's a Sakshi magazine in Telugu. Navya Daily is a magazine over there. So a friend of mine who's an author in Telugu, so he kind of picked those because he loved those names over there. So for me, it has worked like impulsive way.
Okay. And what about Maulshree?
I think mine is also very instinctive. I kind of, as far as the names of the books or the titles of the books are concerned, I kind of connect the title to the place. And of course, not just the story, but the place. So if I say Missing Buddha, so either you will guess it that I'm talking about Lord Buddha, or I'm talking about a part of the country where there's a lot of Buddhist influence. So I kind of do that. And then, of course, there's a mystery to the title also. If you read the book, you find what the mystery is. Forbidden Fort is, of course, because it is about a fort primarily. As far as the names of the protagonists are concerned, then those are also very instinctive for me. I like to keep them simple names, easy to pronounce, easy to remember, short names, and names that are slightly not very common. I wouldn't have very common names. I would rather have names that just stay in your head for a little while. So that's how my mind works.
Great. That's wonderful. Now tell us something about the publishing industry. Prashant said that the publisher liked the name and they kept it. So tell us how when you began, did you have a literary agent? Did you have to self-publish, or did somebody help you build your profile? And how did you get into mainstream publishing, and whether you all are also considering alternative publishing platforms to get access or reach to more readers, young readers? So
For
maybe
me,
Krishna.
ma'am, it was like I had a literary agent. It's called The Book Bakers by Mr. Suhail Mathur, and he is a gem of a person, I would say. So he helped out a lot in the other parts other than writing, which includes the publishing journey. So finding a publisher, meeting their expectations, how to do a submission properly, because it's a professional world there. So that really helped me, and I think I'm blessed.
That's great. What about Prashant? How did you manage?
I have so far done all the process on my own. Should I go through the process in general, or I mean, it just starts with sending a query to the publishers, which gives a brief summary of your book and the age group and the number of words and that, and typically they respond within, I guess, anywhere from a week to 6 months, whether they want to read the entire manuscript. You also send obviously a chapter or 2 or 3 in the beginning, and then once they've considered it, then either they want to read the entire manuscript or they want to pass. So that's how the typical process works, and to be very honest, I find it very tedious, basically, because you're still kind of, once you write a book, then you kind of want to move on to the next book. But the publishing process in itself can be quite lengthy, and it can be quite distracting. So that's one aspect of publishing which I don't really enjoy. So I did self-publish one book because it was something I thought, let me just experiment and see where it goes. But then I wasn't particularly happy with the way things went, because marketing a self-published book is extremely difficult, because publishing is very easy. You go on Amazon, or there are so many people out there who will just do it for a fee. So getting the book out is very easy, but then getting it to the right audience is extremely difficult, because you have so many thousands of books literally being uploaded or published on a daily basis, if not more. So that was quite, and especially when it comes to children's fiction, self-publishing is quite tough, because you have to have illustrations ideally for at least most of the books, unless you're writing a mystery or a fantasy for the higher ages. You generally need well illustrated books, and that also costs money. So while I have been fortunate to be published by the likes of HarperCollins and Scholastic and Penguin, on the other hand, I do find that the process is very lengthy and it's not very encouraging. And there are just a handful of children's publishers in India. I'd say 12, at most 15, that can be considered to be good publishers. So that's, I think, been one of the aspects of this industry which I haven't really enjoyed, because as an author, I want to write. And once I finish writing, I want to move on to the next book. So going ahead, I personally feel that I will be more interested in self-publishing, just because anyway, from my perspective, this is not something I would do for this is not something that I would do for the monetary compensation, but out of passion. And then to have that delay, that constant delay, when all the ideas are churning, that becomes a little difficult to manage.
Yes, I can understand the frustration that goes into trying to get a manuscript through, and then finally when it does get published, there's not adequate marketing, and it can be very, very frustrating. But there is also one way of reaching out to your readers by, like, what we are doing today here, talking about your books. But if the audience is children, or you have children's festivals, where you can give your reading. So have you considered that? Have you done that? Have you visited schools or festivals where you've had held reading sessions? And if you have, please share your experiences of how the readings went and how the children responded to your readings.
So this was actually something I did with Scholastic. So Scholastic was really great about the marketing aspect. So they took me on a tour to more than 40 schools across Maharashtra, Gujarat, Goa, and MP. And the experiences were really great. But I honestly don't think it's realistic to devote so much time to something like this. Because again, from my perspective, writing is what I want to do. Publishing is a necessary evil, but then marketing becomes, just too much, basically, going beyond that. So that's where that difficulty arises. But yes, I mean, interacting with children, interacting with your audience, that was brilliant, and they asked fantastic questions. So that was the part I really enjoyed. but then that took place over almost a year, basically. So it is a little tough to be, only a children's fiction author, all said and done in India. Basically, like I said, given the publishing challenges, given the lack of promotion that children's fiction, especially, I mean, it's there across all forms of literature, other than pop fiction probably, but for children's fiction, you hardly see any kind of coverage, in the media. So, given all these things, from my perspective, it's just a matter of me, fulfilling my passion to write, and then kind of just letting it be, basically.
All right. But Maulshree, how has your experience been reading to young readers?
I think that is one of the biggest perks of being a young adult fiction author. I was invited to a children's festival last year, Yayawar, Jammu Literary Fest. The founder is Miss Manupur Sandhu. And I had a fantastic experience. She made the kids read the book in advance. So they sent me these written reviews and questions. So they had written on their, in their cursive writing, that this is how we like the book. And there were questions sent to me. And then I sat down and I made a video and I answered all the questions. Recently, I was invited by two different book clubs in Delhi. They read my book as part of their, one read during the summer vacation, the other one during Diwali vacation. So read the book, and then they were doing it chapter wise. So they would make it, word of the day, something like that. And then they invited me for a virtual session with the students. And they were so excited. They had questions, they had such wonderful insights. I was simply amazed, because when you're writing, you do not realize what impact your writing is going to have on the young minds. I mean, I'm being very honest, you write with the perspective of, even if you are an adult and writing for a young adult, you're still an adult. So your perspective over the years has changed. You were a child a few decades ago, so to speak. And when the children, they bring back the same curiosity that you once had and the same enthusiasm, it is simply amazing. And there was one child who asked me about a particular character in the book, and he said, what's the mystery of Greg? Now, Greg was a secondary character in my first book. I honestly did not remember why did I write and what I had written. So I was blank for a few seconds, and I said, what do you think it was? And he was so enthusiastic, and he gave me such wonderful insight on that character, and I was simply floored. Because this is why we write young adult fiction. It is as simple as that, to ignite that imagination, to ignite a sense of wonder and positivity and optimism in a world that is getting a little crazy day by day. And it simply justifies all the trouble we go through to write the book, to get the book out there. So for me personally, it has been a very rewarding experience, especially in the last year or so, where I've been invited for the Literary Fest, the CIAWAR, and the book clubs that have called me over. And I hope it continues so that I can have this happy feeling all the time.
That's wonderful. I'm so glad, because when you get to hear from your readers personally, I'm sure it has it really warms up your heart, isn't it? And you want to continue to write then. So, Prasun, perhaps your last comment on this.
Yeah, so for me, reaching out to the young readers is definitely important, but an author cannot do it alone. So they need the support of the publisher, or festivals like this, where we can directly interact with a proper audience. Like I remember last year in 2019, I was there with the Pune International Literary Festival by Manjari Prabhu ma'am. So there we had a session which I named as the Magical Kaleidoscope. And 2-3 schools had sent their students. So we had a gathering of around 75 students with their teachers, where we spoke about climate change and conserving the environment, which was again the subject of my book Ringo and the Yogi. So that kind of binds the author with the reader on the basis of a subject. Similarly, when I was also there at the Jammu Literary Festival that Maulshree was mentioning. So there we did a session where the kids had to draw something, and they sent me about 50 hand-drawn pages, and I created a story based on each of these. And I read them out during the session in a dramatic manner, and then we had a discussion. So that kind of bonding is created. So that is very important. That is very.
That's wonderful. That must have been quite an experience.
Yes, yes.
It's been a wonderful session. We really enjoyed listening to all three of you. What has really impressed me is that your stories, which have so much beauty in them, also have the beauty of the human spirit shining through them. And you're talking about friendships, you're talking about love, you're talking about loyalty and bravery, and you really made us very happy this afternoon. And when you introduced us to your characters and your stories, you've somewhere brought out the child, I'm sure, in all of us. And I can see those children are alive and kicking inside of you. How your eyes light up, all of you, when you start talking about your stories. And I'm going to read more and more of your stories, and perhaps you will hear from me. If you don't mind an older woman responding to your stories, but you've really, really excited me about reading your stories. It's been wonderful talking to all three of you. And I thank once again Shulini and Sakshi for giving us this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Yes, Prasun, you mentioned Manjari Prabhu and the Pune Literary Festival. The next session, she's going to be here. So you better watch out for that. Yeah.
I will. I have seen the schedule, ma'am. I will definitely.
So, thank you so much, Meenakshi ma'am, for being such a wonderful host. You put us all at ease, and I'm so grateful to be a part of this session. Thank you, Manju ma'am, for inviting me over. And it has been a wonderful afternoon and a wonderful experience. Thank you.
You were a delight, Maulshree. I enjoyed myself thoroughly.
Thank you, everyone. Good to see you, Prashant. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Maulshree, Prasun. It was wonderful. Ringo and the Yogi sound so good that I'm going to pick it up and read it myself. I've read a few of Prashant's books as well. When my kids were young, I used to buy them for them. So it's been great listening to all of you. And a mystery book set in Dharamshala sounds very, very tempting, Maulshree. I'll be picking up that as well.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Meenakshi. And great to be here with you, Maulshree and Prasun. And thanks the others for listening in. Thank you so much, guys.